Well, I want to tell you a story. And the thing about a story is, it's got some truth in it, but it may not always be factual. That's the thing about stories. Now, having said that, occasionally, story and history, the list of facts, coincide. Those are important moments. Well, you may take what you want from that in thinking about this story. My father was a preschooler in this story, and his little brother, a couple of years younger than he, was one too. And it took place during the Second World War. And so the boys were patrolling around the place where they lived to make sure that there weren't any Japanese invaders or Nazi spies. They had some sticks which served them as toy guns, and they went on patrol. And they ranged pretty far, because children could in those days, and it was the country, so the only danger, of course, was the danger presented by livestock and fences and that kind of thing. Well, they ranged toward this farm, and the farmer, being out, saw them and said, "Hey, boys." And they said, "Yes, sir." He said, "What you need for your patrol is some cavalry." "How's that, sir?" He says, "Well, I've got this thing I want to give you." "Yes, sir." And that farmer brought out on a lead a donkey. And that donkey was so old that the gray of its muzzle went all the way to its withers. And they asked the farmer, "What's his name?" Farm animals generally don't have names. But this was a beast of burden and not a beast of eating. So the farmer told him his name is Fuzzy. And he said, "Here's the lead. You take him with you. He's yours now." Well, Pop took the lead and led Fuzzy for a while, and his little brother led him for a while, because you have to take turns. And they took Fuzzy on patrol with them. He was their cavalry. And the poor beast staggered around behind them the best he could. And finally, it come on toward late afternoon, and they went home, because it was supper time. And they get to the house, and there's Granddaddy standing out on the front porch. And he says, "Boys, where did you get that thing?" And they said, "Well, the farmer gave him to us." "Well, you can't keep it. You have to take it back to him." And they said, "But he gave him to us. We'll take care of him." And Granddaddy knew that they had no idea of how to take care of a donkey or much of anything else. They were just little children, and he also knew that times were hard, and he didn't make a lot of money. And so he said, well, all right, you can keep him, knowing full well that he would have to take care of the beast. And it made them glad. And he said, now, boys, take him to the garage and tie him up there and come on in and get washed up for supper. And so they did. And they ate their delicious supper. And then they went back out to talk to Fuzzy, of course, and pet him and tell him what a good boy he was, good donkey, and how he was brave in facing the enemy that day. And they told him that they would be back in the morning. And they went inside to take their rest, little realizing that during the night, poor Fuzzy would enter his eternal rest. And they get up in the morning, and they shovel down their oatmeal. That's what they were raised on, oatmeal and Calvinism. And they went out to the garage, and there was poor Fuzzy, lying on his side on the ground, his 4 legs stretched out in rigor mortis, but his eyes closed and a peaceful expression on his face. I suppose he was a good donkey. And they wept. They wept bitterly, as only children can. And Pop said, well, I guess we'd better dig the hole to bury him. And he went and got the shovel and began to scratch at the ground, because he's too little to dig that hole. And his little brother went and got a board and said, I'll make the tombstone, and took a piece of chalk out of his pocket and began to write in the swirls that pre-literate children use for writing. And my father said, what are you going to put on the tombstone? And his little brother, being a Cisco Kid fan, said, Fuzzy the Burro. This hit my father just wrong. And he said, he's not a burro, he's a donkey. And they began to argue. And their voices rose, because in their argument was all the bitterness and all the disappointment of finding this animal dead. And finally, my grandfather came to the back door. And he said, boys. And they came to the foot of the steps and said, yes, sir. Their faces hot, tears still running down their cheeks. And he said, what are you arguing about? It's unseemly. And they said, well, Fuzzy died. Oh, my grandfather's heart sank, because he knew he would be digging that hole. And he said, well, Why are you arguing? And Pop said, well, he wants to put Fuzzy the burro on the tombstone. But he's not a burro, he's a donkey. It ought to say Fuzzy the donkey. This struck my grandfather with a dilemma. The animal is the same. Burro and donkey, it's the same animal. But you can't choose between them, because if you've done that, you favored one son over the other, and it'll hurt your feelings. And he had a moment of inspiration. He said, boys, you know that the Bible is the Word of God. And they stood up straight and they said, yes, sir. And he said, and you know that every word in it is true. And they said, yes, sir. And he said, and you know what the Bible, by which I mean the King James Version, calls that animal. And they said, yes, sir. And they knew at that moment the tombstone would say, Fuzzy. Not Fuzzy the anything, just Fuzzy. Well, you might think that this is the end of the story, but it's not. My grandfather, sure enough, dug the hole, worked all day digging it, and dragged poor Fuzzy into it with a rope, and got him covered up, and went back inside to resume his study. My father, seeing that there were loose bits of dirt, was taking the shovel and putting those into the hole for the sake of completeness. Well, about that time, Uncle Wilburn came home from school, and he saw the hole, and he saw my father, and he saw the shovel, and he said, are you digging a foxhole? And my father said, not according to the Bible.